The wind howled like a living thing, a beast born of ice and hunger. Snow swirled in thick sheets, erasing the landscape, swallowing the world whole. Eleanor Whitmore tightened her grip on the reins, her fingers stiff with cold, her heart hammering in her chest. She should have waited, should have planned, but patience had never been her virtue, and the walls of Black Hollow had been closing in too fast. The town had already buried her alive. She would rather die in the storm than spend another year suffocating under the weight of expectation. The horse beneath her moved anxiously, its breath steaming in the bitter air. It had been bred for the frontier, but even the strongest of beasts had their limits. Ice crusted its mane, its hooves slipping in the rising drifts. Eleanor urged it forward, leaning low, eyes narrowed against the stinging wind. She had planned to ride west, toward the river, where the trading posts were fewer and the roads less traveled. There she could find passage further still, anywhere but Black Hollow. But the storm had other ideas. The gusts came in violent bursts, rattling her bones, clawing at her cloak. Visibility was gone. Landmarks disappeared. Her heartbeat became the only rhythm she could trust, a desperate pounding that matched the horse's faltering steps. She had underestimated winter's wrath, and then it happened. A sudden shift beneath them, the ground uneven, a patch of ice where there should have been snow. The horse let out a shrill cry, its legs buckling. The world tipped sideways. Eleanor barely had time to throw out her arms before she was falling, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Snow swallowed her whole, cold and blinding, pressing against her like a great white weight. Darkness flickered at the edges of her vision. The wind screamed above her, but beneath it something else moved, something quieter, something watchful. Her body ached, her limbs sluggish. She tried to push herself up, but the cold was stealing her strength. Her lashes were heavy with ice. The snow clung to her like hands, pulling her down, whispering promises of sleep, of surrender. But then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not the hurried steps of a man caught in the storm, but something else. Something that did not fear the cold. A shape emerged from the storm, tall and broad, more shadow than man. Snow clung to him, yet he moved through it as if he belonged to it, his steps sure, effortless. Eleanor blinked, struggling to focus, and then he was there, crouching beside her. Rough hands gripped her arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. She tried to struggle, to demand who he was, but her lips were too numb, her voice lost to the wind. Dark eyes met hers, depthless, unreadable. And then the world tilted once more, and she knew nothing at all. She woke to warmth. It should have been impossible. The last thing she remembered was the cold biting deep, the knowledge that she had made a terrible mistake. But now heat curled around her, the scent of burning wood filling her lungs. Her fingers twitched against the thick fur draped over her, coarse and heavy. A fire crackled somewhere nearby. Her eyelids felt leaden, but she forced them open, blinking against the dim glow. She was not in Black Hollow. The walls were rough-hewn, logs, the floor covered in pelts. Shadows danced along the low ceiling, the flickering light revealing shelves lined with dried herbs, tools, and weapons. An axe leaned against the far wall, its edge gleaming in the firelight. And then she saw him, the man from the storm. He sat on the other side of the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, practiced movements. His coat was heavy, lined with thick fur, and his hands, large, scarred, moved with the certainty of someone who had spent his life with a blade. She shifted beneath the blanket, and instantly his dark eyes flicked up, locking onto hers. Awake. The "I" word was not spoken, but she felt it all the same. Eleanor swallowed, her throat dry. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Just kept sharpening the knife, the rhythmic scrape filling the silence. She pushed herself up, muscles protesting. The fur slid from her shoulders, and the chill in the air sent a shiver down her spine. "Who are you?" Still, nothing. Frustration flared, cutting through the lingering haze. "I need to get back to town." A long pause. Then finally his voice, low, rough, like distant thunder. "Storm's not done." Her jaw tightened. "I can manage." Another scrape of metal on Stone, then without looking up, "No, you can't." The certainty in his tone sent a prickle down her spine. He had seen what she had not, that she was moments from death when he found her, that without him she would not have woken at all. She exhaled sharply, wrapping her arms around herself. "You live out here alone?" A small shift of his shoulders, not quite a nod. The people of Black Hollow spoke of him in whispers. Rowan Hale, a ghost of a man. He came to town only when necessary, trading furs and supplies in silence. Some claimed he was a criminal, hiding from justice. Others swore he had blood on his hands, that he had done things no good man would do. But Eleanor had never seen him up close before. Now, as she studied him across the firelight, she saw what the town had never bothered to understand. He was not a man hiding. He was a man watching, waiting. For what, she did not know. Outside, the wind still howled, but beneath it, another sound reached her ears, low, distorted by the storm. Her long, drawn-out howl. Wolves. She had heard them before, but this was different. A call, an answer. Not just hungry beasts searching for prey, but something more deliberate. Her gaze flickered back to Rowan. He had gone still, the blade in his hands forgotten. His eyes, sharp and assessing, turned toward the door. The silence stretched. Then, with slow certainty, he set the knife aside, rose to his feet. Eleanor watched as he moved, each motion precise, controlled. He took a rifle from the wall, checking it with the ease of long familiarity. The firelight caught the metal gleaming along its surface. The wind screamed against the walls, a second howl. Closer, she swallowed. "They're just wolves." Rowan's gaze met hers, something unreadable in the depths. "No," he said simply. Then, without another word, he crossed the room and stepped outside into the storm. The door swung shut behind him, cutting off the fire's warmth, leaving Eleanor in a space thick with silence. The wind raged outside, but her pulse was louder, a steady, insistent drumbeat beneath her ribs. Something about the way he had moved, unhurried but purposeful, unsettled her. He hadn't braced against the cold, hadn't hesitated. He had. Simply gone. She threw off the heavy fur and swung her feet to the ground. The floor was cold, but she barely felt it. Pushing herself up, she hesitated only a moment before following. The storm met her like a living force, the wind slamming against her, stealing her breath. Snow curled through the air in swirling veils, making the trees beyond little more than looming shadows. Rowan stood a few paces away, rifle in hand, gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. She followed his line of sight, but saw nothing. Only the forest, dense and unmoving. Then the sound came again, not a mere howl, but something deeper, a resonance that made the air shiver. Eleanor swallowed hard. "They're just wolves." Rowan didn't turn. "No." The weight of that single word pressed against her, stirring something uneasy in her chest. He didn't sound afraid. He sounded like a man facing an inevitability, her fingers curled into fists. "You act like there's something else." A pause. "Then, they are." The rifle barely moved, but she saw the way his grip adjusted, the way his body settled, ready. Whatever he was waiting for, he knew it was coming. She wanted to press him, to demand answers, but something held her back. A feeling, a quiet instinct that whispered she didn't want to know. Then the trees shifted. A shape moved between the trunks, low, sleek, impossibly fast. Then another. And another. Her breath hitched. They were circling. Not mindless beasts drawn by hunger, but something more deliberate. Calculating. Rowan exhaled slowly, a breath of patience and certainty. "They're testing." She barely heard. Him. Her focus was locked on the movement, on the way they weaved through the storm like shadows given form. Then she saw their eyes, silver, almost luminous in the darkness. One shape broke from the rest, moving closer. Larger than any wolf she had seen, its coat was thick with winter, its head held unnervingly high. It did not lunge, did not snarl. It only stared. Rowan raised the rifle. Eleanor barely had time to react before the wolf moved. It didn't charge, it disappeared. A blur of motion, faster than any animal should be. Rowan fired. The crack of the gun shattered the night, the flash of fire briefly illuminating the snow. A yelp followed, sharp and short, but before Eleanor could see the result, another shape leapt from the side. Rowan pivoted, impossibly quick, but this one wasn't aiming for him. Eleanor had only a heartbeat to register its approach before the weight of it slammed into her, knocking her backward. The world tilted, her back hitting the ground hard, the air rushing from her lungs. Teeth flashed. A hand seized the wolf by the throat. "Rowan!" He tore the creature away from her, throwing it aside with a strength that was almost unnatural. The wolf hit the ground but landed in a crouch, snarling. Rowan stood between her and the pack now, rifle discarded, his breath steady despite the fight. The leader of the wolves, if that's what they were, let out a low, rumbling growl. Rowan lifted his chin slightly. "Not yet," he said, voice calm but edged with warning. The wolf stilled. A long moment passed, thick with something unspoken. Then, as quickly as they had come, the wolves turned and vanished into the storm. Eleanor lay where she had fallen, breath coming hard, heart hammering against her ribs. She felt the cold creeping into her bones, but she barely noticed. Rowan stepped forward, offering a hand. She hesitated, then took it, letting him pull her up. His grip was firm, warm even through the cold. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Rowan retrieved his rifle, then turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the fire was still burning. The heat wrapped around her, but it did little to ease the tension in her limbs. She watched as Rowan set the rifle aside, moving with the same unhurried certainty he always did. She needed answers. "You knew they would come." Her voice was steadier than she expected. Rowan didn't look at her. "Yes." "You didn't seem surprised." He ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling. "Because I wasn't." She crossed her arms, frustration tightening in her chest. "You're not going to explain, are you?" A long silence stretched between them. Then finally he turned to face her. "You should leave when the storm breaks." Eleanor stared at him, searching for something in his expression that would tell her what he wasn't saying. "Why?" "Because you don't belong in this," she frowned. "In what?" His jaw tightened. "A fight that isn't yours." She felt the sharp edge of his words, the warning woven into them. But something inside her rebelled at the idea of walking away. "I don't run," she said quietly. Rowan held her gaze for a moment longer, something unreadable in his expression. Then, without another word, he turned back to the fire. Eleanor sat down on the edge of the cot, pressing her hands together to stop the tremor she wasn't ready to acknowledge. The wind had not lessened outside, and she knew, deep in her bones, that the wolves would return. She also knew that whatever had happened tonight was only the beginning. The fire burned low, its embers pulsing like a heartbeat in the dim cabin. Eleanor sat with her back straight, her hands pressed together in her lap to keep from fidgeting. The silence between them had grown thick, weighted by unspoken things. Rowan sat across from her, his gaze steady, dark eyes unreadable beneath the flickering light. She had seen many men in her life, merchants, lawmen, preachers, but none had unsettled her the way he did. He was not like them. He carried no badge, no title. The people of Black Hollow feared him, whispered of his isolation as if it were a sickness. But now, after what she had witnessed, she knew the truth. They did not fear him because he was alone. They feared him because he was different. Her voice came quieter than she expected. "What are they?" Rowan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for a worn leather strap near the fire, pulling a whetstone from its folds. With slow, methodical movements, he ran it along the edge of his knife, the rhythmic scrape filling the space between them. The blade caught the light, its surface worn with use but impossibly sharp. She waited, refusing to let him ignore the question. Finally, he exhaled, setting the knife down with careful precision. "You wouldn't believe me." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Try me." A flicker of something passed through his eyes, something like hesitation, but then it was gone. He rested his elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "They are not just wolves." She had known it, felt it, but hearing him say it sent a shiver down her spine. "Then what are they?" Rowan's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting toward the window, where the storm still howled. "Hunters," he said finally, "not of men, but of something older." The air in the cabin felt heavier. Eleanor swallowed, pressing for more. Older than what? He turned his gaze back to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something crack in that impenetrable exterior. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. Weariness. A weight that had settled on his shoulders long before she had stumbled into his world. Before there were towns, before men put borders on maps, there were others who walked this land, he said. Not men, not beasts, something in between. His fingers flexed slightly as if measuring his words. Their kind ruled the wild long before we did. They kept to themselves, unseen, untouchable, until something changed. Eleanor barely breathed. What changed? His expression darkened. A war. The words settled like a stone between them. A long time ago something came through, he continued. Something worse. It hunted them the way they hunted everything else. It did not stop, it did not die, and when it was done only a few remained. Those that survived, scattered, became something less than what they were. His gaze flickered back to the fire. But not all of them faded. A cold realization crept over Eleanor's skin. The wolves, Rowan nodded slowly. They aren't just testing me. They are searching for weakness. They know I am the last. She barely processed the words before her mind latched onto something else. The way he moved, the way his wounds healed faster than any man should, the way the wolves had tested him, not her. Her breath caught. "You're one of them." His gaze didn't waver. "No. But you're not—" She stopped, struggling to put it into words. Rowan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face before answering. "I am what's left." The words carried an emptiness that made her chest tighten. He wasn't just alone. He was the last of something. She shook her head, trying to piece together what it meant. "You've been fighting them all this time?" A muscle tensed in his jaw. "It is what I was meant to do." She didn't know what to say to that. For years she had thought of running, of escaping a town that had never felt like home, but now she saw her life for what it had been. Small. The petty judgments of Black Hollow seemed meaningless compared to what sat before her now. A man who had carried a burden longer than she could imagine, who had never run, never wavered. Something hot and angry burned inside her. "Why does no one know?" Rowan gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "Would you have believed it?" She had no answer for that. The wind rattled the cabin, a sharp gust shaking the wooden frame. Eleanor stared into the fire, letting the heat chase away the cold that had settled deep in her bones. "What happens now?" His voice was quieter this time. "You leave when the storm ends." A sharp protest rose in her throat, but he cut her off before she could speak. "You don't belong in this," he said, his tone firm. "You have a life in town, a future." Eleanor scoffed. "You think I can go back to playing the obedient daughter after this?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She pushed herself up, pacing now, the weight of everything pressing down on her. "If you're the last, who fights when you're gone?" Rowan said nothing. The realization hit like a punch to the ribs. "That's why they're testing you," she murmured. "They want to know if you're strong enough to stop what's coming." A long silence stretched between them. Then Rowan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Go back to Black Hollow, Eleanor." The finality in his voice sparked something reckless in her. She turned to face him fully, chin lifting. "No." His brow furrowed slightly, as if he hadn't expected that answer. "I won't go back," she said, stepping closer. "Not when I know what's coming." Rowan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It isn't your fight." "But it's yours," she shot back. "And if you fall, who stops them?" He studied her for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his sharp features. Finally he shook his head, muttering under his breath. Stubborn, she crossed her arms. Adaptable. A ghost of a smirk flickered across his lips, but it vanished just as quickly. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "You don't understand what this fight takes." "Then, show me." The words surprised them both. Rowan's gaze hardened. "It isn't that simple." Eleanor met his stare, unflinching. "You think I'm weak." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I think you don't know what you're asking for. She stepped forward, closing the space between them. Then tell me, show me. Give me a reason to go back, because right now Black Hollow feels like a cage, and I'm not walking into it again. The fire crackled, casting gold against the worn lines of his face. He was still for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then finally he exhaled. You really want to know? Eleanor nodded. Rowan reached for his knife, not in threat, but in offering. Then let's begin. The night smelled of ice and blood. Eleanor ran, her breath sharp in her chest, her fingers tight around the hilt of Rowan's knife. The snow had slowed, but the air was thick with the promise of something worse, something inevitable. The storm had never been the real threat. It had only masked what lurked beneath, what waited for the right moment to strike. That moment had come. Rowan was ahead, moving through the trees with unnatural speed. His rifle was slung across his back now. Bullets wouldn't be enough for what was coming. He had warned her of this, had told her to stay behind. She had ignored him. The town was close. She could see the faint glow of lanterns through the thinning trees, the scent of smoke drifting on the wind. Black Hollow was still asleep, unaware of the danger creeping toward it. Then the sound came again, a low guttural howl so deep it seemed to vibrate in her bones. It wasn't alone. Another joined it, then another. The wolves had come. Rowan stopped at the tree line, his body rigid, listening. The air was too still, the kind of silence that only came before something terrible. Eleanor slowed beside him, her pulse hammering. How many? He didn't answer. A single lantern burned on the front porch of the sheriff's office. The rest of the town lay in darkness, quiet, defenseless. Then, movement. At first, she thought it was only the wind stirring the snow. But then the shadows shifted, peeled away from the edges of the buildings. Eyes gleamed in the dark, silver and predatory. They were already here. Rowan tensed. They're waiting. She swallowed, forcing herself to stay steady. For what? He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see his expression. Grim. Certain. For me. As if summoned by his words, the first wolf moved. It was larger than the others, stepping into the lantern's glow with slow, deliberate ease. Its coat was thick, black as the night, its eyes glinting like polished steel. It did not snarl, did not lunge. It simply watched. Eleanor could feel its intelligence, its purpose. This was no ordinary animal. Rowan's voice was low. Stay behind me. She ignored him. A second wolf emerged from the darkness, then a third. The air filled with their presence, a pressure that pressed against her lungs. They were surrounding the town, cutting off escape. Then the leader moved, not toward Rowan, toward the sheriff's office. Eleanor's breath caught. The sheriff, the people. They would die before they understood what was happening. Rowan didn't hesitate. He moved, faster than any man should be able to, crossing the open street in an instant. The wolf turned, just as Rowan struck, the blade in his hand flashing in the lamplight. The beast dodged unnaturally quick, but Rowan was quicker. His knife found its mark, cutting deep along its side. The wolf snarled, stumbling, but it did not fall. Eleanor had no time to watch. Another shape lunged from the darkness, rushing her. She ducked, the instinct sharp and immediate. The wolf's breath was hot as it snapped at empty air, but she didn't freeze. She turned with it, slashing outward. The blade met fur, met flesh. The wolf yelped, retreating. The rest did not. They attacked. Chaos erupted. Rowan fought like something out of a nightmare, his movements precise, lethal. He did not hesitate, did not waste motion. Every strike was meant to kill. Eleanor fought beside him, moving on instinct, on the fear that kept her sharp. She had never killed before, but she did not falter. These were not animals. They were something else, something worse. The first body hit the snow, then another. But the pack did not scatter, because this was not a battle, it was a test. Rowan realized it at the same time she did. He turned, blood smeared across his knuckles, his breath steady despite the fight. His eyes locked on hers, dark and knowing. "They're waiting," he murmured. The words settled like ice in her stomach. Waiting for what? Then the ground shuddered. A sound deeper than before filled the air. It was not a howl. It was something else. A summoning, a command. The pack retreated, melting into the shadows, not running, reshaping. Rowan's grip on his knife tightened. "It's here." Eleanor felt it before she saw it. The air thickened, the night pressing closer. The lanterns flickered, the wind dying. Then, from the darkness beyond the town, something stepped forward. It was shaped like a wolf but larger, taller than a man. Its limbs elongated, its fur matted with frost. Its eyes, ancient and hollow, locked onto Rowan with something that was almost recognition. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the knife. "What is that?" Rowan did not look, away from it. "The reason I was left behind." The creature moved, each step deliberate. Rowan took a slow breath. Then, without another word, he lunged. The impact sent them both crashing into the snow. Rowan's blade sank into flesh, but the creature did not cry out. Its massive hand slammed into his chest, sending him skidding across the ground. Eleanor ran forward, heart pounding. The knife in her grip felt too small, too human. The creature turned toward her. She moved before she could think. Its strike came fast, but she ducked, rolling beneath its reach. She lashed out, the blade cutting across its leg. It staggered but did not fall. Then Rowan was there. He did not hesitate. He moved behind the creature, driving his blade deep, twisting. For a moment nothing happened. Then the beast let out a sound that was not a roar, not a howl, but something older. It fell. Silence rushed in. Eleanor stood frozen, her breath ragged. Rowan pushed himself to his feet, his face unreadable. The remaining wolves were gone, the fight was over. For now. The town was still standing. The people would wake in the morning, unaware of how close they had come to being nothing more than memory. Rowan looked at her, the weight of the night still heavy in his gaze. She met his stare, unflinching. "You told me to leave," she murmured. His lips pressed into a thin line. She lifted her chin. "I'm not going anywhere." Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. The storm had passed, but winter was far from over.